Hello and welcome back to Women Warriors of the Word and our 5 minutes of faith. I'm Nikki 1K, and it's an honor to be able to go through the airwaves and share God's Word to encourage you in your faith walk with God. We're going to be in Exodus this morning or this afternoon, whatever time it is where you're at, Exodus chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 10, and we're talking about Moses because the truth of the scriptures, one of the truths, is that every person in it gives us an example of who God is and our relationship with Him. Sometimes the examples are what not to do and of God's irritation, wrath, and anger. And sometimes they're examples of exactly what to do and God's grace and mercy. And the big difference depends on what part of the Bible you're in. In the Old Testament, of course, Jesus hasn't come yet. Grace and mercy are very different after Jesus comes. And right now we're in Exodus. God is telling Moses to go back to Egypt and speak to Pharaoh to let his people go. And in verse 10, Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow in speech and tongue." And the Lord said to him in verse 11, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." Verse 13. But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." And 14. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God in him. But take this staff in your hands so you can perform the signs with it." And in this moment of faith, Moses is extremely honest with God. They have this back and forth, and Moses understands what God is asking him to do, but he is worried about his physical abilities. He's slow in speech and tongue, he says, and asks God to send another. And when God reaffirms his power over Moses and that God will help him, Moses falters and asks God to send someone else. But God says, "I will not send someone else, but I will allow Aaron to speak for you, and I will work through the both of you." And this 5 minutes of faith is to focus in on the fact that when we are building and walking in our relationship with Christ, we get to be honest. And I love how God was angry. I don't love that Moses disobeyed and had a lack of faith, but I love that God met Moses and he was irritated and God was angry. It says so. It says so. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, but God met Moses where he was. God has chosen you for something. And whether you are walking in it full force, head on, or you are there telling God the reasons why it shouldn't be you. And I've been there. There was a long period of time that I was like, not me, God. But the truth of God's love over us is that God meets us where we are. And even when our doubt and lack of faith angers him, he meets us where we are. Moses was not being nonchalant. He was being humble before God. "Pardon your servant, Lord. Forgive me, Lord, but please send someone else." And when we are in a period of doubt or disobedience, it is faith that allows us to go to God and say, "Forgive me, pardon me, God. Help me. Bring someone to support me. Send another." And when God says no for the second time and Moses has Aaron, he knows is coming alongside him, Miracles happen through Moses. Today's 5 minutes of faith is to be honest with God. Be honest and allow God to meet you where you are, because Aaron later stops becoming Moses's voice and starts becoming his helper. Aaron was always his helper, but his role as helper changed as Moses grew in confidence, and that confidence came from God. As you walk in faith, trust God to build your confidence. Until next time.